Welcome to the More to Story podcast. I'm so glad that you all have come along for this important set of episodes where we're talking about leadership in the church, specifically as it relates to the emerging Global Methodist Church and the way they are looking at leadership at an administrative and pastoral level as it comes through bishops or not. There's a lot of different plans that are out on the table. And I've had 9 interviews with the candidates who people have been proposed for one plan. But today I'm going to look at another plan. But before I do that, I want you to know that this podcast is brought to you by Wesley Biblical Seminary, where I serve as president and where we are developing trusted leaders for faithful churches. And we have just enrolled our largest student body in our history. We have more than 800 students who are actively participating in academic programs. 750 academic programs. 50 of them are in a non-academic program. I want to be clear there. Here at WBS, one programs, the non-academic programs, are Wesley Institute, which you could still get into now, which is a 9-month program that walks people through every book of the Bible with seminary professors teaching, and that's a weekly session. There's many churches around the country that are using this to train Sunday school teachers, to get them more deep content, something they can use in their local settings. And then there's also a theology track. So there's a Bible track and a theology track where we walk through basic theological disciplines. And that, again, happens over a 9-month period. So you can find out more about that at wbs.edu. In addition to our bachelor's, master's, doctoral degrees, we'd love for you to find out about what we're doing here at WBS. Also, I'd love for you to sign up for my email list at andymillerthird.com. That's andymillerii.com. And if you sign up for my email list, I will send you a free tool called 5 Steps to Deeper Teaching and Preaching. And then on top of that, if you see my website, you'll see some things that might be helpful for Sunday school classes and small groups under the course tab. There's a course on heaven. There's a course on the book of Jude. I'd love for you to check that out.
Hi, we at Bundamba Salvation Army in Queensland, Australia, have just finished Andy's Heaven and Other Destinations course. We found that there's a great hunger to look into this important topic. We had 28 people ranging from young adults through to seniors who wanted to know more about what the Bible has to say about life after death. We found that the course worked in both online and in our in-person groups. Andy's enthusiasm helped bring this topic to life. Our people were stretched and they loved their discussion times. On our last night, Andy even was able to join us online for a Q&A, which was great. We used the course together with a 4-week sermon series that enabled our whole church to go on the journey. I would say that my big takeaway has been to grow in my desire for the great embodied earthy heaven that God has prepared for us and to want to live today in light of this hope. I strongly recommend you to check out Andy's Heaven and Other Destinations course.
I am so glad to welcome into the podcast my new friend. We just met, Therrell. And hopefully I had you say your name correctly. He was the president pro-tem of the Florida conference of the GMC. Jay, welcome to the podcast.
Thanks for having me, Andy. I appreciate it.
Well, I've known about you for a while because of some of the things, the ways that you were, well, I'm trying to come up with a nice way of saying it. You've had some rough days toward the end of your time with the United Methodist Church, and really you're somebody who was in the spotlight because of your stance. I would just love to hear a little bit of your story, kind of emerging into the Global Methodist Church. That might even set the stage for the main topic that we're going to talk about today.
Sure. My departure from the United Methodist Church began when I was a district superintendent in the Florida conference of the UMC, and my goodness, it gets very long.
Sorry, I know this is a podcast in itself.
Exactly, it probably is, but I just could not continue to serve in that environment, and was essentially given an ultimatum: either bend the knee or get off my cabinet. And
wow,
the response was, "Then I'll get off your cabinet." Yeah. And from there, started as president of the Florida Regional Chapter for the Wesleyan Covenant Association. And then I was very humbled to be asked to follow Keith Boyette as global president of the Wesleyan Covenant Association, and really worked the whole final disaffiliation window to help get the 7,000 plus churches out of the United Methodist Church. And to try our best to contend to help our African and European and Asian brothers and sisters to get out too. We did not have much help there, but
Yeah,
it was a privilege to serve as president of the WCA and do that, and then to transition to this role as president pro-tem here in Florida, and get this annual conference started. We just celebrated our 1 year birthday a few days ago. September 1st was our 1 year
wow.
birthday, and it's been a wild ride. It has been a ride where I have seen God be so faithful throughout the whole process.
Hmm.
I don't deserve that, but He is so good, and it's been a beautiful thing to see how God has brought this new thing into existence.
It is.
It is beautiful.
Yeah, yeah. I've said that. I started to catch myself as I've been doing interviews lately. I've been saying the word beautiful often because I think this is a descriptive of this moment. This isn't, and even what we're going to talk about today, I know there are disagreements, but I sense, and correct me if I'm wrong, but I sense a spirit of cooperation even in the middle of those disagreements. Could you
Oh,
tell
for
me
sure.
about that? Because I mean, this probably is. I'm this, and from my seat, the educational requirements for clergy. That's just something I'm thinking a lot about, and that's a hot button topic. But I think the plan that you're a part of writing, often called the Florida Plan, might be seen as one of the biggest issues, or one of the issues that people are anticipating the most at the convening conference. So tell me about even like the spirit that's around some of this now, and like the spirit of cooperation even in the middle of this time.
Sure. I guess maybe I'd start by saying we hold this all very loosely, uh,
Okay.
and we trust that the Holy Spirit is in the midst of it, and that when we get to San Jose and whatever comes out, I'm very sure whatever plan gets adopted is not going to be the original plan submitted in the decision. I'm very positive of that. Whatever comes out is going to be amended, and we're okay with that.
Hmm.
We're absolutely okay with that. Someone said recently, I can't even remember who it was now, but someone said recently that maybe it was Rob Renfro, that you know whatever plan we choose is important, but it's not nearly as important whenever we elect bishops that we elect the right people,
Yes.
which is kind of the old good to great mindset of getting not only getting the right people on the bus, but getting them in the right seats on the bus. And
Right.
I think there's a lot of truth to that. So I mean, obviously, the Florida delegation is a zealous advocate for our plan, and we don't apologize for that. But at the same time, we're good with coming together and conferencing together with brothers and sisters, and we trust it'll get worked out the right way.
Yeah, absolutely. And you're somewhat uniquely equipped for this, be with your own history. But I assume at some point you served as a lawyer, or at least you went to law school, right? And so this is you and Keith Boyette both have that in the background. Tell us a little about your history before you became a district superintendent, and like how God's equipped you for this moment.
Yeah, I practiced law for a few years. I was a tax lawyer, state planner, um, little corporate, all that kind of stuff. My wife's an attorney, um, but very quickly realized that just was not what God was calling me to do, and became a pastor pretty quickly. The kind of again that story too could take a long time, but kind of the thing that I think always interests people when I share it was when I finally stopped fighting God and said, "All right, I will be obedient to this call you placed on me. I don't want to do it, but I'll be obedient." Yeah, I went to the president of the firm that I worked for. In fact, I was his associate, and I took my resignation letter to him and gave it to him, and he looked at me and he said, "Well, um, our law firm has sent six other pastors to attorneys to seminary. I guess we'll have to send a seventh."
Oh,
And
wow.
I had no idea that that was part of the history of our firm. You could have knocked me over with a feather at the moment. It was truly a God thing. And just they were absolutely amazing and such a blessing to our family. They let me work part-time. Most law firms don't do that. While I went to school, and it was a just a really cool thing to have that work out. But yes, I did used to practice law, but I'm sure Keith would probably say the same thing. I don't think of myself as a lawyer. I am still a member of the bar, but I think of myself as a pastor.
Right, right. But thankfully, some of those experiences are helpful to have a pastor who has that background. And I
Yep.
think I don't know how much my story. I'm new to I wasn't from the GMC, so I came from the Salvation Army
Right.
into the GMC. So there is not any sense of bottom up leadership in the Salvation Army. And I'm not saying anything rude about that system. It's a top down
The
system from
way
the
it's
very
structured.
beginning.
Right.
Yeah, it
Right.
is an army. It's an absolute military system. And so because I've been so surprised and pleasantly to see the way various people who have gifts, who are interested in writing legislation, are doing that. Now, I didn't know that meant when I was accepted the opportunity to be a delegate that I have to read 700 pages of that type of writing. Um, but there it is. There it is. So we're moving
Yep.
forward in that way. Um,
Yep. Yep. Yep.
but
And
I'm thankful for it that you all have a say, that somebody who has that background, and then it may be some others, lay people, there's lawyers on our lay delegates on our delegation or lawyers. I'm thankful. I'm so thankful that they have an opportunity to speak into the life of this new denomination.
that's part of the beauty of the body of Christ. There's so many of us, and it takes all of us coming together to be able to carry out the mission we've been entrusted with. So I think it's just part and parcel of being a follower of Jesus. It's a great thing.
Absolutely. Well, you mentioned your leadership of the Wesleyan Covenant Association internationally and then locally too. And that's a part of the context for what has been called the Florida or the hybrid plan, which when you're one of the principal authors of. So tell us about that. Like how does the WCA enter into that story, even the background for this legislation?
Yeah, so the Wesleyan Covenant Association had created a draft book of doctrines and discipline many years ago. Uh, probably around 2017 was when it came out, and part of the draft book of doctrines and discipline was a model for the episcopacy, and it is the model upon which most of us went around to local congregations when we were encouraging them to join the GMC. I know I did that a lot in my role. People all over the world I spoke to, and I would often tell them, while we have not chosen a model of an episcopacy yet, here is the model that we've kind of put out there. It's probably going to look something like this. I have no doubt it will get amended, but it will look something like this. And so, I am actually personal friends, I think, with every single person on the commission that put the General Superintendency Plan out, and I love them all. But there are some aspects of that plan that are very different than what was in the WCA model that many of us shared about with a lot of people. And so, to us in Florida, it felt like we needed to at least put that model forward so the General Conference could consider it. That it would almost feel a little disingenuous if we did not put that model forward and allow it to be considered by the delegates that were there, because so many of us had shared aspects of it with people around not only the United States, but around the globe.
Gotcha. So that at least it has a fair representation of something that was the basis for why people might have, or a piece of why people might have left. So do I hear in you kind of like a sense of like, you wonder if that is it going to even pass? Are you skeptical that it will even go forward?
I always believe that I'm the underdog. So,
Okay.
and I just think that's a healthy way to view yourself. And so, the General Superintendent Plan comes with the blessing of the Transitional Leadership Council, and so I kind of like a candidate who has the extra addition of incumbency helping
Yeah.
them.
Yeah.
Sure, of course, I think they have that going for them,
Right.
but we truly believe that this is the better plan, and I'm happy to discuss
Yeah.
why. And I,
Tell me about that. What are the key differences? Or I know that might not mean you have to describe the other, or just describe yours first. However you're comfortable. I mean, you've communicated this often, so
oh
whatever
yeah.
the clearest way is forward. I'm glad to hear from you.
So the main goal for our plan is we want to ensure that the Global Methodist Church remains a movement for as long as possible and not become an institution. And we think that happens by keeping our structure as flat and as decentralized as possible. And so that's what we're trying to achieve here. We're trying to keep a smaller footprint institutionally. We're trying to create flexibility. We're trying to lower cost so that more dollars remain in the local church so that they can do ministry with it. I think everyone would agree in the Global Methodist Church, the primary, if not the only disciple making tool in the world is the local church. That's where disciples are made. Annual conferences don't make disciples. General conferences don't make disciples. I've been delegates at those in our former denomination. There was not one single disciple that was made at those. They're made by the local church. And so we want to do everything we can to make sure that the local church is as empowered as possible and has as much money as possible and is less of a structure above it so that the local church can be unburdened to carry out its duties. So that's really kind of the philosophical reason behind the plan.
That's helpful. So when you talk about movement to institution, what is it specifically about your plan then that enables it to be more of a movement? Because in general, like it seems like you have a regional bishop that's chosen from a pool of bishops, and this would be after 2026, right? Your plan doesn't have anything. Forgive me for saying your plan. I know there's other people who are part of writing it. Just want to acknowledge that. But your plan that you're representing here, at least, it doesn't elect bishops for 2 years. And correct me if I'm wrong. And then in 2 years, then there is a pool of bishops that are elected by the General Conference. And then an annual conference can select one of those bishops to serve. And then, but they have more power than the other plan. Those bishops would have. It would help me know what happens then in that local. You're making a face that makes me say I might not have had that right.
Well, you're close.
Okay.
So first of all, our plan does not elect any bishops in 2024. With all due respect to the 9 that are currently running and the others who've now been listed as potentially joining them. And again, as I said to you earlier, I think I know every single one of them, many of whom are close personal friends. They're all wonderful people. And if they run in 2026, I'm more than happy to vote for them. I think they're amazing people. We think this feels very rushed. It is very bizarre to us to be possibly electing bishops before we even have a structure to which we're electing them to. That just seems really strange to us because we don't know what our structure is going to be, but yet we have nominees and they're doing interviews and sending out information over e-blasts and all that sort of thing. It just seems very strange. And if we're being really honest, it's gotten messy already. There's been some drama the past few weeks around all that. And I think it's probably likely to get messier. And I think it also, when we have a very truncated amount of time in Costa Rica and a lot to accomplish in a very short period of time, that is then an extra piece that has to be inserted into that agenda to try to get it all done in time. And we just don't think it needs to happen. So our plan would take the presidents pro tem that are currently serving and would rename them conference superintendents.
Okay.
They only serve for 2 years. So they would just be serving from 24 to 26. Conference superintendents, a lot of people don't, or presidents pro tem, a lot of people don't realize have all the authority of a bishop now, with the exception of 2 things. They cannot lay their hands on someone's head and ordain them. And our plan doesn't give them that authority either.
Okay.
So the only thing our plan would give a president pro tem or a conference superintendent that they don't have now is the authority to fix an appointment. But in reality, Andy, that's already going on because it's the presidents pro tem and their cabinets that are making the appointments. We just send an email off to Bishop Webb or Bishop Jones and say, hey, our cabinet has worked with this church closely. We've consulted here all the ways we've done that. We believe this pastor and this church are a good match. And they just forward that email off to the benefits office. So that is not a slam on either of them. I adore Scott and Mark. They're great. They just have lots to do. And that's just something that we can be doing. They have 20 conferences apiece, and there's no way they can be involved in the appointment processes of 20 conferences. So it really just allows us to continue in the way that we're operating now without having to trying to elect bishops when we don't even have a structure in place. Our motto in Florida is perfect, then elect. Perfect in 24, elect in 26. Presidents pro tem are functioning fine now, and they've already established relationships and created leadership capital. Let's just leverage that for the next 2 years and not be so rushed. It almost, with all due respect, feels to me a little bit like Israel clamoring for a king. They want a king so badly. And God says, you don't know what you're asking for. And then he gives them one. Let's take some time to think through this, get a plan in 24, still have an opportunity in 26 to tweak it if we need to, and we come back and elect folks in 26.
Actually, and you mentioned the this waiting period, and that it would basically for these 2 years just be anticipating the legislation that would be put in place at this interim period. But Bishops Webb and Jones, part of what seems to be appealing about the TLC plan, just to me personally, is that I've appreciated their leadership. And as somebody new to the GMC who didn't come from the UMC, I've liked the way that I can see these leaders providing a connection, but and also leadership where there is, even if it is just a functional approving of an email, and I'm not in any of those conversations or on any of those emails, there is some sense of authority that they have. That the TLC plan, and a few that the candidates that I've interviewed have said something to this effect, that it's almost like we've fallen into this model and we kind of like it, so that it might even eliminate some of the challenges that would exist with having a local bishop who is over one particular area. That this maybe enables more connection. What do you think of that?
I would respectfully disagree with all that. I don't like any of it, quite honestly. So Florida, we want an incarnational bishop. Jesus is incarnational. He was temporal and spiritual in his leadership. He taught the disciples spiritually, and he healed people, exorcised demons, and fed people temporally. We want a bishop that does that. I fear that the General Superintendent Plan is going to create bishops that they're so divided. I understand the legislation says spiritual and temporal, but everyone who's talking about the plan says, no, we want the bishops to be the spiritual leaders. First of all, I don't know how you separate that. I'm a pastor.
Right.
I've served local churches. I've been a district superintendent. I'm now functioning in a role that's very similar to a bishop that we used to know in the UMC. I don't know how to not lead both spiritually and temporally. To me, and that's what we would call in the law a distinction without a difference. I don't know how you separate that to begin with. I'm a president pro tem and I lead both. I help make appointments temporal, and I put out teaching documents and blogs and all sorts of things like that all the time because I think that's what I should do. So to me, that just feels weird to us. But second of all, what I'm afraid what could happen as an unintended consequence is that we have these 6 to 8 bishops who aren't really in each annual conference, but a handful of days a year, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 days a year, and they become irrelevant to the local church. They might be very relevant to the general church, and that's great. But the people in the pews aren't going to see them. They're not going to interact with them. I'm in a different church in my annual conference every week, every Sunday, preaching or participating in worship. I go to churches in my annual conference and help them do strategic vision processes to, be very clear about what God's calling their church to do. I mentor young clergy in our annual conference. I am very hands-on doing both. We want an incarnational bishop where the people in the pews actually know who he or she is, and they see that bishop rolling their sleeves up and riding the circuit of their own annual conference and helping those churches to carry out the mission of making disciples.
Yeah, certainly the mission of making disciples, we want to make sure whatever we can do to facilitate that is a priority. It seems like you could still function, and like I'm just using you as an example because you're a president pro tem, and if you then became a conference superintendent under the TLC's model, and there's a bishop that's functioning in a leaning in to the teaching side, but still multiple times the legislation does mention both spiritual and temporal. So it's not separating them. I think there's just like an emphasis. That's what I would suggest is in that legislation. But you'd still be able to do all that. You just wouldn't have the title bishop, or the president pro tems wouldn't have the title bishop.
I could care less about titles. That does absolutely nothing for me. You can call me whatever you want to call me. Could care less. Yeah, it's not about that for me in the slightest. Why have two layers of bureaucracy, which is more expensive, a bigger institutional footprint, when we only need one? And by the way, the historical position of the episcopacy is to have one, is to have a residential bishop. Ryan Danker in Firebrand magazine a couple of weeks ago wrote an excellent piece about the episcopacy. Bishops, the early bishops, and really for the long history of the Orthodox Church, have always been residential for that reason. If we go to a general superintendent model, that's a very different understanding of the episcopacy than the church really has ever known, Protestant, Catholic, or Eastern Orthodox. But a friend of mine in Europe made the comment, and I know some of my friends promoting the general plan might not like this, but I think it's apt. So what their plan basically does is create bishops that we call conference superintendents and archbishops that we call bishops. We don't see why you need the two layers. Flatten that and get it decentralized.
Yeah, I suppose I just back to Ryan, my friend, our friend, like it's just a difference in what happened in American Methodism. And so I think that's where, and if you're friends with Ryan on social media, he really likes British things. And I in general like what happened with Francis Asbury in the way. Now, of course, he would have been somebody who would have been probably more hands-on than maybe this model would have suggested. So,
I was about to say, but
it would be more.
You're citing one of the most hands-on, roll up your sleeves bishops we've ever had in Francis Asbury. And let's be honest, so was John Wesley. John Wesley certainly was a spiritual leader, but John Wesley was a temporal leader as well. He was making all the decisions, and you didn't cross with Wesley. He didn't ever take the title bishop, but he was. If we're being really honest.
Yeah. The current plan of the TLC, then also, and this, it's so funny to even talk about some of this because this all might change in committee, but the current plan has the bishop as having a role in appointing the conference superintendent. So it seems like that's a significant temporal power.
It is, but it's about the only one. It really is. And taking Ryan's article, and if you read the one that came out this week on apostolic succession, historically, if you want to call them dioceses, but the cities where the bishops led, it was the people of that diocese who picked their bishop. That they were the ones who picked that person. So again, it's not inconsistent with the long haul history of the Greater C Church.
Oh, for sure. Yeah, I wouldn't say. Yeah, I'm not making that argument.
We'd be the ones that are aberrant.
Yeah, you see the things
and I don't have a problem with being a point away. That's just who we are as Methodists. But it's about the only temporal thing that the TLC plan gives to the bishops.
You've mentioned a few times already, like, well, in Florida, we're like this. And I do imagine you do have a good authority, not just based on your position, but your knowledge of the Florida conference that you speak. You're speaking on behalf of them, of what they understand. When you bring up the diocese type of perspective, I do wonder occasionally about, again, knowing that the jurisdictions in the United Methodist Church were very different and that they are based upon what was happening in those areas. So the Western jurisdiction was incredibly liberal, and this is where we had all these challenges. Is there a danger that could happen with the Florida plan too, that it could end up looking like with a regionalism that's not as connected?
Well, I don't know how it could. You're electing people at the general conference. You're not electing in regional bodies that's the key distinction between what happened in the United Methodist Church and what we're proposing in the Global Methodist Church. You elected bishops and jurisdictions. We don't want that. We want people, potential bishops, which is why you saw my face in your original description. It's potential bishops elected to the pool. You're not a bishop when you're elected to the pool. You continue in your current appointment until an annual conference or a group of annual conferences, should they choose to share a bishop and have a general superintendent. Our plan allows for both. That's what makes it a hybrid. But you're not a bishop until you're chosen by a
So the hybrid's connected to what can, it's not only a regional bishop.
No.
It doesn't have to be. Yeah.
Doesn't have to be. I mean, you could have a conference in the United States and a conference in Africa want to share a bishop. That's possible. Maybe it would be good. I don't know. I haven't thought about it, but Florida's partnered with South Africa. Who knows? Maybe it'd be good if we're doing ministry together that we share one. I don't know. But by the way, I'm very confident if our plan were to pass, you will have both.
Okay,
and
gotcha.
We think that's a good thing, because we think making disciples in South Carolina looks different than making disciples in California, and it looks way different than making disciples in Bulgaria and the Congo and the Philippines. And so we think each annual conference should be able to choose missionally what kind of superintendent, whether it's residential or general, fits best for them. And there will be some. I mean, here's an example. Nigeria, there are 4 annual conferences in Nigeria. They have historically always shared a bishop because they're all in the same country together. Congo has had traditionally multiple annual conferences. I would imagine those conferences would want to continue to share one. So you're going to have annual conferences sharing a general superintendent. And then you may have some annual conferences that say, no, we'd rather have just one serving us. We say, why does that need to be mandated top down? Why not let the annual conferences decide what's best for themselves missionally?
Okay. And that's the emphasis that you have. It seems very consistently that the annual conferences then have this opportunity to choose what's happening in their area. Okay. You also mentioned the financial aspect, that this would be a financial savings and put more money in the local church. Could you detail like how you see that happening?
Sure. So if we have a general superintendent plan, you're going to have 8 bishops, at least from 2024 to 2026, being paid for out of the general budget of the church. If you don't have general superintendents, you don't have those bishops being paid for out of the general church. And that is a lot of money. And let's say you have eventually after 2026, let's say you have 8 to 10 general superintendents. You're talking at a 6-figure, not just 100, but probably in the $130,000, $150,000 range for a bishop. If it's comparable to what it was in the UMC, plus expenses, plus an office, plus health insurance, plus retirement, all the stuff that comes along with it, you're easily talking a $2, $3, $4 million item in the general church budget. So our plan eliminates all that. And then you have the annual conferences paying for their bishops. They're already paying for conference superintendents or presidents pro-tem. Some have full-time, some do not have full-time. And under our plan, they're free to choose that still. So those conferences that want to have a full-time residential bishop will adjust their budgets accordingly. Many of ours do already, so that's not an unusual thing. They would not need to increase their connectional funding. Conferences that want to share one could share one and have a general superintendent. And then under our plan, they would just put a plan together with the Episcopacy committee from the other 2, 3, 4 conferences that says how they'll divide those costs out between the annual conference. I have had people who promote the TLC plan say, but the 1% connectional funding rate produces more than enough money to pay for that. And my response is, then return it to the local church. Reduce the connectional. If we don't need an extra $4 million to pay for all these bishops, send it back to the local churches. That is where ministry takes place. That is where disciples are made. Give that money back. Let's look at whether we can reduce general connection funding. And that's what we would argue.
I guess I'm trying to well, I realized that when I interviewed the 9 candidates, I was just interviewing them about them. I wasn't really talking to them about these plans. So I probably need to have somebody on who was a part of the committee on the TLC plan. So I'm going to try, if I get somebody on that side, I'll try to push back too. So I'm going to push back a little bit on that. Thinking about the 1%. It seems like one of the pieces that you have as a part of your justification is that this was what everybody expected. Well, it seems like most churches knew that the general conference level would get 1%. It seems like that's a reasonable amount for people to have. And if that then accommodates this episcopacy model, it seems like that would be this. It's not too much. Well, I'm glad to hear you respond. Yeah.
I just fundamentally disagree with that. I think everything should surround the mission. The local church makes disciples. And so we keep as much resources as possible with the local church. And if that means we can lower that connectional funding fee, which keeps more dollars in the local church treasury, I think that's what you do. That's not been the understanding, by the way.
Okay.
We've always, the current book of Doctrines and Discipline, which, by the way, I was one of the authors of. Chapel Temple, Tom Lambrecht, and I were the 3 original authors of the current transitional book of Doctrines and Discipline.
And you guys are the authors of this plan, the Florida plan as well. Are they a part of that?
I asked them to come together with me to kind of tweak it and get it ready to be submitted to the General Conference. I want to be fair. Tom is the General Secretary for the General Conference, so he's not endorsed any plan because he needs to remain objective. I totally understand that. So I don't want to put that on him. It's not fair to put that on him, but he certainly helped me get the petition ready.
Yeah.
Or Florida endorsed it. But the transitional book of Doctrines and Discipline sets ceilings on connectional funding.
Yes.
It doesn't set any, so it's a ceiling of 1.5% that's possible for the general church. But the reason it was a ceiling was in hopes that it would be less.
Reduced. Okay. Interesting.
Right. And we want to keep as much money in the local churches as possible. I am convinced that to keep a movement from becoming an institution, that institutions, I don't know how else to say this, I don't mean it pejoratively, I think institutions have to be starved. And you starve them with 2 things, budgets and term limits. And so you keep the budget as small as you can, because otherwise institutions creep. They get a little bigger this year, and then a little bigger next year, and then a little bigger the next year. And 10 years later, they're really big. So you starve them with budgets and you starve them with term limits so that there is a turnover with different people who don't get entrenched and stuck. I want us to stay a movement as long as we possibly can. I think it's probably inevitable that at some point we will shift to an institution, but I pray we can keep this movement going in that sense for many years before that finally happens.
With the idea of term limits, so what does your plan do with term limits?
They're very similar. There's actually a lot that the 2 plans are very similar on. There's probably a majority of overlap between the 2 plans. The differences are key, but there's probably a majority of the things that they have in common. Ours is a 12-year term limit. The TLC plan's 2 6-year. So for a total of 12, we are very open. I actually may even put an amendment forward on our plan if our committee ends up perfecting our plan to switch ours to a 2 6-year. Yeah. So
interesting.
They're very close. And I think we all agree that that's one thing that has to be in place, or term limits.
One thing that it seems to be like, and I love hearing that about the term limits.
I know Ryan would disagree with that, by the way.
I'm sure he would.
Ryan says that at the end of his article. Yeah,
he wants a king.
He wants a lifetime of episcopacy.
Yeah. I'm really interested in the institution movement conversation, in part because that's what I saw happen in my the denomination that discipled me. In that tradition, the general, not just general superintendent, but the general was given total authority over all aspects of the movement. And while that was probably a part of the growth in the early stages, particularly after William Booth's death, and the same thing could be said with John Wesley. After that point, there's a splintering. a move towards institutional or organizationalism. But yet the problem in the Salvation Army's model is that those positions retained all of this control and power, and it started to move towards preservation as opposed to. And so when the two things come up, and since we've used the language temporal or administrative probably is a better word. Ministry's in there. It's not a non-theological word, but temporal and spiritual leadership. It seems like what's happened is that the spiritual leadership gets neglected and the temporal or administrative side is highlighted in light of the fact that you just have to sustain yourself. And so I get a little bit of shakes because I see how that model has come about. And so that's a little bit of my perspective. But I just want to say, Jay, I hope you don't hear me arguing with you. I'm hopefully giving you an opportunity to respond to some of the things that are there.
No, I enjoy it. So let me offer a different perspective on that, because I've heard others say that too. I hear a lot of people talk about the administrative side. I hope this comes across the right way, but they've never been a district superintendent or a bishop. Once you sit in those roles, you begin to, do I do administrative stuff as president pro tem in Florida? I do, but we have a conference administrator who does most of that. She's amazing. Her name's Nako Kellum.
Yes, by the way, we worked with her at WBS. She does a great job.
By the way, Nako was on the commission that created the TLC plan, and she now supports ours and it, fully, by the way. But most of what I do is spiritual. And I go back to, I think it's a very easy crutch to fall on to try to split the two when I think they're intertwined together. When I'm making an appointment, you can argue that's temporal, and some of it is. I would argue to you it's way more spiritual, because that is setting the person that's going to lead that local church. And as so goes the leader, so goes the rest of the organization. And I would actually argue that may be the most important thing I do, is try to get the right people at the right church. We spend a lot of time doing that. I've heard some bishops talk about all the administrative functions they had to do in the United Methodist Church. Well, that depended on the bishop and the conference. Yes, some had hospital systems in them, and they were on boards for that. Okay, we don't, and we're not going to. The Global Methodist, there's not going to be. We don't have any universities, or colleges, so none of our bishops are going to sit on boards of trustees for universities or colleges or publishing houses, so it's just. Our institutional footprint, thankfully, is already small, and so that drastically reduces all that to begin with. We only have, 6 proposed general commissions that we're going to create. That too, it just lessens all of that administrative or temporal piece to begin with. I think it gets talked about a lot, and so people assume that there's this massive amount of administration, and I just don't think. I think the dirty little secret is there isn't. And most of it, quite honestly, is spiritual. And I also think we sometimes refer to administrative ministry in a pejorative sense, like that's administrative. It's valuable. That's what makes all the trains run on time. And if you don't have that, it'll all fall apart. So it's a valuable ministry unto itself. I don't fall into that so much. I go back to the incarnational piece. We want both, which is very Wesleyan, both and instead of either or.
That's helpful. Okay, I'm going to ask you to step outside of even this legislation. You piqued my interest because thinking about making appointments and how that's one of the most intense things you've done. Talk to me about what that's been like in this new model where churches have more a say in who comes to serve them. What challenges have you dealt with there as a president pro tem?
As someone who has made appointments in both the United Methodist Church and the Global Methodist Church, it was way faster and way easier making appointments in the United Methodist Church. Our process is way harder, and I think it's much better.
Okay.
I think it's far better. Our process is going to take longer because it allows the local church to have so much more involvement in the consultation process. And so we tell all of our churches, we would rather get it right than fast.
Mm-hmm.
And we take seriously when we meet with them and have them fill out profiles and hear all the needs that they have. And at least in our annual conference, we then do our very best to try to find people that have gifts that match those needs. And then we let the two get together and they have several weeks to get to know each other. We tell them, at least in our conference, talk as much as you can, meet in person, meet over Zoom, talk by phone,
Yes.
watch their sermons online, all the stuff,
Yes.
so that you can try as best you can. We would, if this doesn't work, we'll go back to the drawing board.
Yeah.
And then that's true for the pastor as well as the church. And I would say with our appointments, we've had an over 90% success rate of the first person matching, which also means we've had about 10% that haven't. And I would say most of the time it's the church that has said, we don't think that's the right match, but we've had probably 2 pastors who said, I just don't think this is the right place for me.
Sure. Interesting.
I'd so much rather know that before we started the
That's right.
appointment than just make the appointment and then find that out 6 months later.
This is one of the beautiful things about this. Whatever plan happens, what we just outlined is giving local churches an opportunity to speak into who God's called them to be in their community. That's incredibly appealing. Now, Jay, you might be able to tell I'm a confident person. I thought I was a pretty good pastor for 15 years of Salvation Army. But one thing I know, and this is the same thing for you in United Methodist Church, nobody ever asked me to come. No local church in this sense. Now, maybe they did a little bit. Maybe they kind of got with the equivalent of the bishop or the in that denomination. And it's such a beautiful thing for the congregation to have a part in saying, yes, this is who we want. Yes, we agree with the conference superintendent that this is who we want to lead us. Now, I think I did a fairly good job in those environments trying to come alongside that. But I just think of what a blessing it will be to know that you're coming together even before you arrive.
Oh, absolutely. We want long-term pastorates. We believe that creates greater stability for the local church, which hopefully then creates a better platform from which to go make disciples and grow.
Amen.
And so I don't apologize to our local churches if it takes us 2 or 3 months instead of 2 or 3 weeks to make an appointment to them. And so far, our local churches have been fine with it.
Yeah. Jay, one of the things with back to the Florida plan, as you're working through this, it seems like those who, and maybe this wouldn't be an issue at all, those who are in president pro tem positions would have an inside track, so to speak, of moving toward being a bishop in 2026. Is that the case?
I think it's possible. I get that. Again, I think that's probably an oversimplification. I know folks who are current presidents pro tem who are more than ready to be to lay that down
sure.
come to the local church when they're done. I also know presidents pro tem who would probably in 2026 retire. They probably would retire now, but they're kind enough to to delay their retirement a couple of years and continue to serve. So would there be current presidents pro tem who run for bishop and probably get elected into the pool? Yes, I think so. Sometimes folks have said, well, that may just mean that your conference then just chooses you. And the response is they may. And I think some conferences will want that. I also think some conferences won't want that. And my response is then let the conference choose. Some conferences may want the comfort of having a known entity. Some may say, nope, we don't want that. And I trust them.
Yeah. A few of the other nominees are president pro tems. Would you be interested in becoming a bishop? Do you think that'd be a path for you?
I have always said that people who end up being bishop should have to go kicking and screaming.
Yeah, sure.
I get very scared by people who aspire to that role. That it really scares me. It especially scared me in the United Methodist Church, but it still scares me in the Global Methodist Church. So would I be open? I guess I'm open. Do I aspire to it? I don't. I love the role that I have right now. And I also think that elders are called to serve local churches. I think that's our highest and most noblest call. Not that you can't serve in the academy
Thank you.
or as
No, I'm with you. I agree.
or in administrative denominational role. That's what I'm doing now. But
Yes.
I think the highest and noble calling for an elder is to serve a local church. And I'd be honored to serve a local church.
Yeah, it's one of our professors here, Steve Blakemore, says when I came to be a seminary professor, some people acted like I had made the big leagues. And he said, no, you totally missed the picture. He said, actually, our role in the seminary is more like being a minor league manager. Like we're here to help people get their swing straightened out so they can go to the big leagues themselves.
Yeah,
That's what
I like
it is.
that. Yeah, I like
so,
that.
Yeah, I
I've
definitely
always,
see that.
I've always thought the rock stars of the church are missionaries.
Yes.
People who are willing to go to another country and sacrifice living, in their own neighborhood with their family and friends to go share Jesus with other folks. Missionaries have always been to me the rock stars of the church.
I asked the 9 candidates for the TLC plan a question like that, about that was hopeful if there was ambition there to let it be seen. But here's what is helpful to me. I think this is just speaking to the movement as a whole, not just to the plans, is that I didn't sense that. I didn't sense political posturing and I don't sense that in my conversation with you at this point either, or even with the way that we're thinking of the plans.
No, I said to you earlier, I know all of the folks running. I know some better than others, but from my role as president of the WCA, I just interacted with lots of people all around the world. The people, if we end up choosing a general superintendent plan and we elect bishops and 2-year bishops in Costa Rica, the people that are running are all wonderful people who would be great gifts to the church. It actually would be hard to choose amongst those folks.
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah, I mean they're all outstanding choices, and for that matter, so are the what is it, the 6 or 8 extra folks who've now been.
Yeah.
I mean, I know almost all of them. Again, some very, very well. We don't have if we go that route, we don't have a bad person to choose from.
Right. Well, I so appreciate your time, Jay. I want to give you a chance to just have a couple more minutes. If there's anything else you want to say about this plan.
I just want to encourage delegates to really consider ensuring what we do helps our denomination, our fledgling 2-year-old toddler denomination, to remain a movement for as long as it can. We will become crusty at some point down the road. I hope it's decades down the road. And I hope we can stay as small and nimble and flat and bottom up oriented as possible, because I think that's what will help the kingdom grow with new Wesleyan Christians.
Mm-hmm. And I think that is clear in what you're presenting, that's your desire. I hope that those same ideas, and I think that it's just, how do we get there? And I think that that's what the debate's going to be here at the end of this month. But I appreciate you taking time with me. In case we have dozens of students who are at WBS from the Florida Conference, and I love them. I'm thankful for it. Thankful for the way that we're able to partner with your conference and all, GMC conferences all over the world. This is an exciting time in the life of the church, and we appreciate your leadership at multiple levels and at multiple stages, Jay. So I appreciate you loving the church this much that you're able to come on my podcast and write this legislation.
It has been a humbling privilege, and so you're very kind. I appreciate it. Thank you.